In today's video, we will be replacing the transmission fluid in my 1999 Toyota 4Runner. Now, there's going to be two different ways that you can do this job. The first way that people will do is that they will drain out the fluid that is in their transmission pan. The manual says it's about 2.1 quarts. From what I've seen and read, it's going to be closer to 3 to 4 quarts, but you're going to drain that out and then you're going to add however much fluid came out, you're going to add that back in. And you do this on a routine basis, maybe 15,000 miles, 30,000 miles, and as you cycle that out during that time frame, you're typically going to have pretty new fluid in there at all times. Now, the second option, and it's going to be what I'm going to do, is you can drain out that fluid, add in the new fluid, but then you're also going to pump out the remaining old fluid. Now, you might want to do this if you haven't changed your transmission fluid in some time. I have not. So that's going to be the route that I go, and with all of the fluid that comes out, you're just making sure that you put that fluid right back into the system, and you're going to consistently check it as it's coming out to see when the fluid is clean. Now, let's say that you've let your transmission go a little bit longer than the typical service interval. Now, it's the case that I'm in, and so I'm going to be not only draining out the pan, but I'm also going to be pumping out the rest of the fluid. Nothing major, I'm not going to use any machinery. Instead, I'm just going to run a hose off of the bottom of the radiator and allow the transmission to pump out the old fluid as I add in the new fluid. The parts and tools to do this job are going to be fairly straightforward. We're going to need a bucket to drain all of the old transmission fluid in, as well as a funnel to put in any new transmission fluid. We've got 16 quarts of our Mobil 1 synthetic automatic transmission fluid. There are other brands that you can use, but this is what I've chosen to go with. We also have our crush washers right here. That's going to be for the trans pan bolt. The rounded side is going to go towards the transmission pan and the flat side towards the bolt itself. And then additionally, we're going to need a breaker bar and a 14mm socket, and then also a torque wrench, as that bolt that comes out of the trans pan is torqued to 15 foot-pounds. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do, and you don't have to do this, but I'm going to drive my 4Runner up and down the block really quick just to warm up the transmission and help that fluid become a little bit more viscous for when we drain it out. Alright, so now here we are underneath the vehicle looking at the transmission pan. We've got our bucket in place. We're going to go ahead and crack it loose. Man, that looks brown, not red in the slightest. So just a quick look here as it's draining down. The fluid is very dark, which isn't a surprise just based off of when the last change was done. But we're going to go ahead and let this drain all out, and then we will add in whatever comes out, which right now we're at about 1.5, moving towards 2 quarts. Now, as the transmission finishes up draining, we're going to put on the new crush washer. So here was the old. See, it was in fact crushed. Here is our new. Just a reminder that the rounded side goes up and the flat side goes to the face of the bolt. Alright, now we have our torque wrench set at 15, so we're going to go ahead and torque down the bolt. Now, as you can see here, we had about 1.5 quarts, which is a little worrisome, and I guess we'll see how much we get as we pump it out. But this fluid was pretty darn dark too. Let me hold the light up to the side. You can just see normal transmission fluid is going to be like a pinkish red color. This is looking like some old oil. So now we're going to take our transmission dipstick out and put 1.5 quarts into the system. Alright, so now we're just going to go ahead and put 1.5 quarts into the system, and you can just see the color difference there with what new fluid looks like in comparison to what my fluid looked like coming out. Now I will say, if you have never drained transmission fluid or worked with it before, it definitely has a potent smell, so just a warning to you. Next up, we are going to remove the skid plate, so I need a 12mm socket. Now the reason we take the skid plate off is so that we can reach this little, let me see if I can find it, there it is, this little nipple right here, and this line is the transmission cooling line, so it's going to run through the bottom of the radiator to cool the fluid before sending it back through this return line. So what we're going to want to do is remove this clamp right here, stick another piece of 3/8 inch hose on, and route it into our drain bucket. And so here's another look. Again, this is the bottom portion of the radiator. I've already slid the clamp back, and we're going to slide this hose back and put on our own 3/8 inch hose that can go down into our drain bucket. And there will be fluid in here, so just be careful. So now this would be much nicer if I had a second set of hands, but I'm gonna get creative here. So I've taken our 3/8 inch hose, I've connected it to that bottom little valve, and I have clamped it to the bucket so that way it doesn't go wild when I turn on the vehicle. And now what I'm gonna do is, I've got two phones here, so I'm just gonna FaceTime myself from the driver's seat and turn the vehicle off after every quart that gets pumped out. That way I can add a new quart in up top, and I'm not running the transmission too low on fluid. Alright, so that was 1 quart. Okay, so we are now up to 3 quarts. You can see the 3 empty ones there. I am going to keep going until we get to 6 quarts, and then I'm going to dump what has come out so that we have a clean bucket and we can start to see if the fluid is getting any more of that red color. Now we're up to 6 quarts, and the fluid coming out of the end of the tube is starting to look a little bit more red. I'm excited to dump all of this into these empty buckets right here and see what we have coming out on the 7th quart. Okay, now that we have the bucket empty, we're going to reconnect our little hose, which is up there, and go to quart number 7. Alright, so let's see how quart number 7 looks. Now it's hard to get a great view, but it is definitely starting to look a bit more red in comparison to when we started. Okay, so we now have 10 quarts of fluid out of the vehicle, and this is a significant color change difference. I'm not sure how well it comes up on the camera, but you can kind of see this brown color that's around the edge, and then this is fairly red. You can see it coming off my finger there. So I just put in the 10th quart. I think I'm going to dispense this into all of the empty containers, and I'm gonna do one more to get us to 11. That should have cycled everything out at this point, and all we should be left with is that new fluid. Now this will be our last quart. So I just finished the 11th quart, and you can see this fluid, as I shake it around, is a bright red color, so much better than when we started. So now what we're gonna do is run the vehicle at idle. We're gonna shift through all of the gears, so from park all the way down to low, and then back up to park. We want to make sure the transmission is in operable temp, because what we're going to do now is check the dipstick to make sure that we have the adequate amount of fluid in the transmission. And so I guess before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and put those hoses back on, otherwise I'm going to make a humongous mess. And putting this hose back on is as simple as it was when we took it off. So we're going to slide this hose that we used off, hopefully. There we go. Okay. And we're going to take the hose that we had stuffed up out of the way and slide it on. And again, just to give you guys another view, there it is right there. Grabbing our hose that we took off earlier. We're going to slide that into place, and then we have our clamp right here. So I'm going to take my handy dandy purple pliers and slide that back over. And then I'm just going to give it the pull test, make sure everything is tight on there. This guy has been watching me the entire time I have been doing this job. All right, now we're gonna shift through each one of the gears and back up. All right, now that the transmission is up to temp, we're gonna do a quick look. I'm gonna wipe it first and then run it back down through there. So quick wipe there. Back down in, pull it up. Let's see if I can show you guys this. We should be in between these two notches. I'm not sure how well it's gonna show. Looks like we're pretty low, so it might just be that we need to continually add some fluid until we get up to that mid-hot mark. So now I've added an entire quart, and it's hard to tell now, but we were just on the bottom side of the hot marker. So I'm gonna go drive it around, come back and check it again. Okay, so I just got back from probably about a 3-mile drive. They got up to 65 miles an hour. Shifts were really smooth, so now we're gonna check our levels here. Looks like we're right at the upper end of hot. I know it's pretty tricky to see here on camera, but it looks like we're in the middle, if not the top of hot. Kind of tough to tell. I'll try it one more time. Okay, so here I am pulling it out one more time. You can kind of see it's right on the O of hot, so almost smack in the middle. And that's with adding an additional quart to the transmission. I'm guessing I was pretty low considering there was only 1.5 that came out of the transmission pan. So that is going to wrap up the transmission fluid flush on a 3rd generation Toyota 4Runner. This job cost me about $85. The fluid itself cost me $72. The crush washers were an additional $5, and that piece of tubing was an additional $2. So hopefully you are able to feel confident going into this job. And now, if you guys have any questions or comments, please leave them below and I will get back to you guys. But with that, this video is wrapping up and I'll see you guys in the next one.